Hello YouTube, it's Shadow Hero 90, welcoming you to my review series, Sexism in Movies and TV, where I peel back the lie of equality that modern-day Hollywood claims exists and reveal the hidden misandry and gynocentrism within both television and in cinema. You know, the entertainment industry has really been against men, and it's the kind of thing, as of late, that has been very relevant. As in, I've kind of been bashing Hollywood for things that people are now just criticizing certain franchises for. I've even spoken to some fans directly who actually have ended up admitting that I was right about certain characters being horrid and awful. And those are just some of the reasons as to why I do this show and why this series is a good thing. Another reason as to why I do this series is the fact that there are no good role models for young men and little boys on American TV. They have all vanished. The terrible role models, yeah, they're there in spades. But the good role models, not so much. They're either being taken off the air, restricted to anime, or moved to Adult Swim. Where, on the other hand, the amount of good role models for girls is also lagging when it comes to American TV, while our good role models for girls, they, for the most part, are restricted to anime. While on the other hand, there's no shortage of bad role models for girls. Truth be told, I would not be surprised if a lot of the people who write this garbage actually want young girls to grow up to be complete assholes, because they are given no good role models. I know a lot of these clowns say it's in the name of progress, and with the example being set by a lot of these characters, little girls in the real world are going to progress in the area of being toxic bitches. I've talked to people on this matter, and I have heard a lot of other people on YouTube bring this up, and they agree with me for the most part. So, those are actually two really good reasons as to why I do this show. And why, when it comes to television, more specifically American television, we need a men's rights revolution. Okay, in this episode of Sexism in Movies and TV, I'm going to be reviewing the Simpsons episode, That 90s Show. I'll admit, not everybody likes this episode, and it does have a few retcons, and I'm just going to say this here and now. This is going to be one of those reviews, the one where I first give you an overview of the plot, and then I tell you everything wrong with it. With that said and done, let the review begin. Okay, the episode starts with the Simpsons needing to make a fire because it's cold out, and after going through things to burn, they find Marge's college diploma. And Lisa instantly jumps into action, needing to know why her mom basically is not a career woman, and why she's a housewife if she has a college diploma. Because, let's face it, Marge is not the mother Lisa wanted. And so our story begins a decade ago with a young Homer and Marge right after high school. Homer and his friends basically have just been discovered and were beginning their music career. Well, Marge basically got her acceptance letter to Springfield University, but it comes with the annual cost of $3,000. But Homer says he's willing to get a job at his father's laser tag arena, more or less to cover the costs. Marge goes to college and instantly is smitten by this really un-American teacher. The guy's basically a liberal douchebag, a nerdy beta male. Marge still thinks she loves Homer, but then Poindexter here shows up, and the idea that she's attracted to him starts to creep into her mind. In all fairness, he probably does this a lot with his students. I'm pretty sure he knew Marge was mostly liberal, and that's why he called the Founding Fathers evil, which is completely un-American, and very good traits for an antagonistic force to have. But he did this just to impress her. In class, she just stares at him dreamily. At home, she's reading a book, while Homer is laughing at something stupid on TV, where basically she looks at him, and it's pretty obvious that she likes her professor. She doesn't like Homer. And might I remind you, something I'm constantly going to be doing throughout this review is that the annual cost of a student loan is $3,000. That's not cheap. Some time passes, and yeah, Marge basically has acknowledged her feelings for this guy, and is all but broken up with Homer. Homer shows up and for the only time in his life actually does something right, breaks up with Marge and tells him he is no longer paying or supporting the new her. Homer and his friends make their debut as Sadgasm with their breakout song Margarine, which Homer wrote about his experiences with Marge and this beta male dork. And this was an attempt to win Marge back, and it blew up in Homer's face. I have no clue why he thought it would work. Even going to Moe's does not get the thought of Marge out of his head. And eventually, Homer just falls into depression. Not having Marge in his life destroyed him for reasons that the show never explains. Essentially, Marge talks to her teacher about getting married, and he reveals the truth. She was just a distraction. He never had any intentions on getting married, and it could easily be implied that he does this with every attractive girl in his class. Just pulls them along like a puppet on a string with the promises of a relationship and kids, only to tell them right before they graduate or before they ask that he doesn't want a family or a wife. Then she dumps him, and he gets beaten up by a smart bully, which is an actual karmic act of justice. Marge she leaves the beach, goes back to campus, where she actually sees the music video of the song Margarine, and sees what Homer had been through because of her. Not MTV does a documentary about Sadgasm and what depression has done to Homer. He's turned to drugs a lot longer than you think he would have. Marge storms down to the mansion and finds Homer, and he's a complete wreck. She spends months bathing him and feeding him and getting him back to the way he was before. And he still ends up in the hospital. They make out, with Homer now working at the mini golf course, and conceive Bart. They make out in modern times. The end. You know, this really reminds me of the Mordecai-Margret shipping that Regular Show did in the following decade, because it basically has the same dynamic. Boy dates girl, girl takes advantage of boy, girl eventually dumps boy for someone else she met at college, etc. I mean, in all fairness, it is the same dynamic, but with the opposite result. Mordecai's crush on Margret was an open secret, and the fact that he could not work up the nerve to be honest with her was a major conflict in, the first 3 seasons at least. And truth be told, Marge had the potential to be just as bad as Margret, if not worse. Because Like Mordecai, when Homer's relationship with Marge went down the tubes, he fell into a terrible depression. And, yeah, Marge did redeem herself by taking care of Homer and getting him back into shape to an extent. But that's only because most of this is a flashback. And the plot really needs her to do so. Where on the other hand, after Margret sent Mordecai into depression, yeah, Mordecai was eventually able to get over it, but when she came back, she pulled this stunt, bringing some, I don't know what he was, like a co-worker or someone at her college, to come with her to pretend to be her boyfriend. And then, in an ironic twist, when he makes his move, she's disgusted and reveals the truth. And then she throws this insane stink, saying that she's tired of feeling like a stranger around her own friends. She was the one who went to college. She was the one who didn't want to stay in touch. I'm more than certain that Eileen was the only character on the show that Margret was actually friends with. And they come across as work friends at best, with Mordecai and Rigby being the only thing they have in common. With Eileen having a crush on Rigby, and Margret taking advantage of Mordecai's crush on her. I mean, in the club episode, Eileen makes a casual crack about Margret setting up a lot of scenarios where Mordecai would be able to spend time around her, potentially tell her how he really feels, but there's always an obstacle in the way. If she can do it, it can easily be implied that she does this sort of thing all the time. And the whole thing with CJ was on purpose. It could easily be assumed that Margret is only around Mordecai when she needs something, wants something, or is bored, and just does this for her own personal kicks. In all fairness, given how that one episode with the fake boyfriend played out, you can easily assume the third option is the most likely. And that's the difference between the two. One has the luxury of being able to manipulate the sap she's dating, and the other one doesn't. Marge stays with Homer because he was paying her college tuition. $3,000. That is not cheap. And Marge still dumps him. Margret left for college, did not stay in touch, and has the gall to come back and actually say she feels like a stranger around her friends. She doesn't know anyone there outside Eileen. Okay, now, I will admit, that I did get some things wrong. I hadn't seen this episode since it aired, and I had completely forgotten that this was actually the scene where Homer gets Marge pregnant. Which leads me into my next point. Now, this episode gets a lot of hate on the grounds of it shits all over the Simpsons continuity. But in all fairness, if you take the montage into consideration, you could easily assume that all of this happens around the course of, say, 2 months. Which is, well, far more than enough time for Marge to get pregnant with Bart. I'm not really sure if Homer is wearing the uniform he wore at the miniature golf course, but yeah, under the assumption I just made, this is the type of retcon that could fit into the Simpsons lore really easily. You just have to change a few things around. Throughout the entire review, I've been comparing Homer and Marge's relationship to Mordecai and Margret's dynamic from regular show. You know, boy meets girl, boy loves girl, boy simps for girl, girl takes advantage of boy, and then girl leaves boy. Yeah, but here's the one thing they never really ever mention. And this applies to Margret as much as it applies to Marge Simpson. And the question is, why? Do they remind Homer or Mordecai of his mother? Is it because they're always seemingly nice to people? And that facade more or less causes said man or boy from seeing what a manipulative little slut he's been simping for. Something that makes both of which look just as stupid and pathetic as Forrest Gump, who, might I add, is an actual tragic figure. Marge Simpson, on the other hand, is not. I'm just gonna say this here and now. Marge is a spoiled brat. Homer gets a job to support her in her dreams. And, yeah. Despite the fact that she knows she's in love with her teacher, she basically keeps her feelings a secret and takes advantage of Homer. That is not what a mature adult would do. A mature adult would break up with her boyfriend while letting him know he can keep the money he made from the job he got to support her, while doing it, while at the same time breaking up with him as gently as possible and letting him know that she'll be getting a job to pay for her college tuition. Does Marge do that? Hell no. She cheats on Homer and only breaks up with him when it becomes impossible to hide it, or in this case, she only broke up with him when she couldn't exploit him anymore. Marge grew up with Patty and Selma, and it is implied that a good reason that Marge is the way that she is, or possibly several, is because of a traumatizing childhood that she received at Patty and Selma's hands. It's pretty obvious that they were a nightmare to live with. You know, this is basically like that episode of Family Guy where we met Peter's sister. The episode wants to say that the family treats Meg like crap because it's a cycle of abuse. Subconsciously, Peter hates Meg because she reminds him of his sister who constantly bullied him, even though that's not the case. A better example would be Carrie from King of Queens. She spent most of her life having to babysit her deranged father. And it's implied that at least 4 to 6 years of freedom away from her responsibilities of watching him is what turned her into a spoiled, entitled brat. King of Queens was one of those shows where they had a running gag that the husband is married to a woman who is really hot, and normally she would never even date him, let alone marry him. In the beginning of The Simpsons, they might have been going for something like that, but this episode really more or less comes off as a justification for that joke. And I'm going to just say the justification really kills the joke. Matt Goring wanted Marge to be seen as a tragic figure. Someone who got knocked up by her boyfriend way too early in life, became a housewife, and never really did anything with her life, implying that she was a waste of one. But given how Marge acts in this episode, and how easily she falls for this un-American sack of crap, it kind of, well, I basically get the idea that not only does Marge deserve the life she has, but she also deserves to live in eternal dread of going broke. More or less having to put up with all all of Homer's stupidity as she watches him make all sorts of crazy business investments and pull all sorts of deranged bullshit that could cause them to go broke at a moment's notice. This episode seeks to explain why Marge is with Homer. But, to be frank, I'm just gonna say it. The defense of this relationship not only kills the joke, but makes Marge Simpson out to be this massive cunt who deserves to lose everything and end up living with Patty and Selma once again and basically going back to being their whipping girl just like she had been as a child. Truth be told, an episode that explains why Homer and Marge are together was done a lot better in the episode The Way He Was. I mean, yeah, Artie Ziff was an entitled jerk, but in all fairness, that episode didn't make Marge out to be, well, a parasite who was only dating Homer while at the same time cheating on him. When talking about Adventure Time, I often use the phrase anti-character development, and I hereby coin that term. It's no secret that halfway through the 2010s, I lost all respect for Adventure Time as a franchise, and in general, and any respect I had towards Penn Ward. As a series, Adventure Time was unbelievably sexist, and as time went on, they delved into the lore of the franchise, and I really gotta say, it is the ultimate case of anti-character development. As in, the more we learned about Finn, Jake, Bubblegum, Marceline, especially those two, the worse they became as actual characters. And thus, the term anti-character development was born. Because the more we learned about them, with Adventure Time stakes being the ultimate example, the more hateable they became. You have no idea how ironic it is that Penn Ward, the guy whose show was the reason for me coining the term anti-character development, was inspired by The Simpsons to basically create a semi-fantasy, man-hating piece of shit. Because The Simpsons comes right underneath Adventure Time in terms of having a case of anti-character development, where the more flashbacks we get, and the more we learn about who these characters are deep down, the more hateable they become in retrospect. The more we learn about these characters, the more they suck. The more hateable they become. The more likely you'd want to see a crossover happen and see them get the ever-living shit kicked out of them. And I'm just going to say this here and now. Marge is nothing but a gold-digging cunt. The fact that Homer provides is the only reason she stays with him at all. I know the writers were going for characterization. They wanted to explain why Marge and Homer are together. But they had already done that in the episode The Way He Was. And, then there's kind of the fact that this portrayal makes Marge out to be a gold digger, and a defense like this completely ruins the joke of a fat, bald idiot married to an extremely attractive woman. They try to expand on the joke by giving Marge foils. And oh boy, is that a bad idea. Because given, the appearances of Marge's foils, you basically imply that Homer could do way better than Marge any day of the week. If Marge is a 6, then all of her foils are 10s at best. And that's kind of an implication that Marge's appearance is why Homer fell in love with her. In all fairness, if it wasn't for the status quo being God, and the Simpsons being poorly written, Homer would have dumped Marge for one of these 4 bachelorettes, and that's saying something since one of them is in her 60s. They definitely draw Marge in a more attractive manner when she was in college, but that was a decade ago. And I just gotta say, with that in mind, Marge really let her appearance go. To the point where if her being attractive is why Homer fell in love with her, the same exact reason why this un-American son of a bitch saw it fit to make Marge his little side piece distraction, then yes, Marge really did let herself go. And Homer should dump her for one of these 4 lovely bachelorettes. And with all that said, I'm going to end this video by saying The Simpsons was always poorly written. And the episode That 90s Show just reveals Marge as a spoiled, entitled, good-for-nothing little cunt who does not deserve what she has. The ending Marge deserves is for Homer to leave her for one of these 4 and end up being forced to move back in with Patty and Selma, where she would become their slave once again, and that's how she would spend the rest of her life.